Hi, I'm Sean Hall, Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club. We're a nonprofit in Western PA whose mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. Welcome to VBC's second episode of Lioness, the Origin Story. This is a special 8-part podcast where Lioness Vets and those who know the history of the Lioness program discuss Taylor Sheridan's new show, Special Ops Lioness, through the lens of their experience. Joining me again are filmmaker and writer Daria Sommers, and Army veteran Shannon Morgan, and a special guest who they will introduce in just a minute. In 2008, filmmaker and writer Daria Sommers, along with her filmmaking colleague Meg McLagan, released Lioness, a documentary that reveals the history of a group of women support soldiers who went to Iraq in 2003 as mechanics, clerks, and engineers, but ended up serving as the original Lioness soldiers. Although the Lionesses' mission was to diffuse tensions with Iraqi women and children, they fought in some of the bloodiest battles of the Iraq War. Shannon Morgan was a member of that original group of Lioness soldiers, an Army mechanic from Mena, Arkansas. She served in Ramadi from 2003 to 2004 during the 2004 Battle of Ramadi. She was one of the group of Army Lioness soldiers attached to the 2-4 Marines during house-to-house searches. Shannon recently launched Operation Lioness, a social support network for women, women veterans, moms, military wives, war veterans, and men seeking positive change. The organization's goal is to provide a safe space for people to connect and support one another on their journey to rehabilitation and recovery. You can visit their website at www.operationlioness.org. I'm again honored to introduce my two wonderful hosts for this podcast, Daria and Shannon. Daria, I'd love for you to introduce our special guest today.
Well, thank you very much, Sean, and thank you to the Veterans Breakfast Club for supporting this podcast and our effort to set history straight about the Lioness program and especially its origins. We do have a special guest, and I want to introduce Rainey Ruthig, who was one of the original Lioness soldiers, who was there with Shannon and, in fact, a close friend of Shannon's. And Rainey, I'm just delighted that you could be here on our second podcast. And you were one of the original Lionesses when you and you remained in the military for 28 years and retired fairly recently. After 28 years, you left as a first sergeant and you were rose to the job of chief instructor at the regional training site maintenance for the Kansas National Guard's AGR program. So congratulations, 28 years. That's fantastic. And again, welcome.
Thank you so much.
The goal of this is to look at Taylor Sheridan's show through the lens of the original Lionesses and their experience. I want to just, while you're here with us, I just want to take a special moment to talk about what it means to be part of the original history. Like you were there with Shannon, and I think there were about 20 women in the 1st Engineer Battalion, and I wanted you to speak about a little bit about how the Lioness program, just you were there doing your job, and how you and Shannon first heard about it and how it began. Could you do that for us?
Yes, I'd like to actually. I always like to get the information out for the original story and also all the continuing story that women are doing in the military, not just the Army, but all branches of service. So it was in 2003 when we first started going. It was when we first got over there on ground. We hit ground in September. In October, when Colonel Cabry and Lieutenant Colonel Brinkley were sitting down, and they realized that the information was being passed to the Iraqi females and the children, the wives and the children, that they couldn't get that information because by their Muslim law, other men couldn't touch the wives and the children. So that's when Colonel Cabry asked Colonel Brinkley if he could have one of his females. There were 19 of us, I believe, total. And Colonel Brinkley said he couldn't because he would not let one female go alone. He wanted to make sure 2 females went so they always had each other's back, because he knew if we were in the same unit together, we would be watching each other's back. So actually the first 2 females that went out in the Lioness program was Specialist Stone, and Specialist Morgan at the time. So those two went out. I took them actually over to 1-5 compound. I felt like a little nervous mother hen. I didn't know what I was getting those two into, because I took them over because at the time I was in the mayor cell, which kind of oversaw our Cap Junction City, and I was one of the higher ranking NCOs, female NCOs. So I took them over there, made sure we did PCCs and PCIs on them, made sure everything was ready. They did all the missions or the battle briefs before, and they got what they needed, and they loaded up, and off they went out onto the first, basically, search with 1-5 field artillery.
And so that was really the very first mission, the very first Lioness mission that you've described.
That was the first Lioness mission.
And so was that in the fall of 2003?
That was, I don't remember and if it was in September, but I believe our first mission out was at the end of September. That we weren't even on ground in Iraq more than 2 weeks when we started going out on missions.
Wow. So that also makes this year the 20th anniversary of the very first Lioness mission.
No, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, it does.
Yeah. And on the first missions, and the ones that ensued in this time period, sort of in the fall through December of 2003, and Shannon, you chime in here too. In some of these were relatively, I mean, you were interacting with the women and children, taking off your helmets and letting them. Did they have a kind of a reaction to the fact that these were women soldiers showing up?
Shannon, you say what you thought on the first mission.
Rainey helped me out here. The first mission was with 1-5, but didn't we go out in the back of, didn't me and Stone go in a 5-ton with them? And it was a night op, if I remember correctly.
Yes, that is 100% true.
Yeah.
You guys left out at 10 p.m.?
Right. We were after some intel from some targets, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, that first mission, I don't think I would categorize it as being a peacekeeping mission, although we did go out and do tons of knock and talks and meet and greets, where we passed out information and stuff and checked in with people to see if anyone needed medical care. It was hard because, I mean, you're breaking into people's homes in the middle of the night and you're trying to separate women and children and keep everyone calm in the middle of all this chaos. And that's a hard mission to accomplish, but they knew that they couldn't do it without us. I think it was important, even though we're not supposed to remove our Kevlar or anything, I think it was important for us to let them know that we were also females, just a way for a female to give another female a nod and be like, it's okay. You're in good hands.
And did you have that experience a little bit, Rainey?
I think if I remember right, after that, Stone broke her leg. So that's when I partnered up with Shannon. Stone didn't go on many, and then she actually left the country because her break was serious enough that it was medical, and I don't remember how she broke her leg.
She fell out
but
of
after
5-ton.
Yeah, she did fall out of a 5-ton. And so after that, that's when I got partnered up with Shannon. And the first one I remember going on, and it was probably the second or third mission. I just remember thinking I felt so bad for him because I couldn't imagine, and I think I remember saying this in the movie too, is I couldn't imagine going into somebody's house, somebody breaking in my house, just feeling like the Gestapo initially. Initially, they were so scared. because the first few missions, you don't know what to expect. You don't know you're in enemy territory. They, the battles had just been won, all that's just all fresh. So to go in there, it's really hard to see these women. They're all in one room. They sleep with the children. The men were off in their own other room. So, we either had our hair in ponytails so that we could, quickly just grab the ponytail, or you'd take your helmet off real quick. And it did ease their tension. But the first couple of times, it was hard. It was really hard to go into someone else's home and basically do that to another human being. As the war went on and you saw more, damage, the fall of Fallujah, the damage that was happening, and you saw more and more intel and more caches that we found, it got a little easier to do.
And I think that's an important point you make, Randy, because in fact, you hadn't, like when you were training and getting prepared back, at Fort Riley, you had no idea you were going to be doing this, because this was a boots on the ground decision that was necessary, but it wasn't like, you had any specific training for this specific kind of activity. And what I love about the fact that you and Shannon just talking about like these very first missions that happened in 2003, that so 20 years later, which is today, you were right there when this program originated. And I'm glad we started with that, because it brings us to the point of today. And I think it's ironic, and just the way things worked out, nobody planned it. When you have a television show coming out of Hollywood, the entertainment industry, and I'm all for riveting television, and female characters, and making sure women can get in action programs. I'm all for that, and yet there's something. I was wondering if both you and Shannon could speak to the fact that this program, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you've seen it or not, but just the idea that there's a program called Lioness, and it's kind of about something completely different, and it doesn't really pay respect or acknowledge or even deal with the reality that is still living within your experience, Shannon's experience, countless of other women who participated, of what this history really was.
Well, it's kind of a double-edged sword in my eyes. I like the idea that it is still getting out that female engagement teams, which they're now called, and that's what the Marines called them, are still on the ground, and they're still doing this, a very important job. Women are still doing this. The Army and the Marines are both on the ground with the female engagement teams. So I think that's important to highlight, that this is still happening, especially with the, all the branches opening up to female service, and, more and more realizing that women are just as capable of doing these jobs as men. And at some point, they're needed to do some of these jobs. I think that's kind of a neat point. So I do want to highlight that this is somewhat good. I don't always want to be the negative Nancy, but the other thing is, why did they have to go that the Marines created the program, or why couldn't they say a blurb in there or call them a female engagement team, or there's other words they could have used instead of Lioness, or use Army instead of Marines, especially when, I still remember and have the news article from the Marine Times that they commented that the Marines wouldn't use their females for fear of losing the first female in combat.
Right, I remember that.
That, and at the time, their females absolutely didn't want any part in it. That was my understanding.
right. And I think it wasn't until 2008 that the Marines first started to train women, because I interviewed a number of them, and we have a short film on it about those are the first Marine Lionesses. So that was much later.
Right, and I believe that's when they started calling them female engagement teams, FETs. You know, and they dropped the term Lioness, because I don't,
right,
in my term, you know, and seeing so many Army soldiers coming through our RTSM, and even we did train Marines there as well, no one ever heard of the term Lioness, but they talked about female engagement teams. So the term Lioness had been dropped a long time ago. So to bring it back into service and to attach it to the Marines kind of baffles me.
Right. And yeah, because I know that Colonel Kennedy, who was like when you guys were attached to the 2-4 Marines in the spring of 2004, Colonel Kennedy went to Helmand Province in 2010. And that's when I, and outside, but just through my contacts, first heard about how important the female engagement teams and how, you know, that had been kind of like the evolution that you started, how important they were, but that they were still periodically, when anyone from Washington would come to town or come to help visit at Helmand Province, they would still pull them out from the field because everyone was still nervous about the combat exclusion policy.
Well, it is a very fine line back in that time to dance. I mean, you look at how many years it took to get the women from the whack and the wave and to get them actually into Army service totally and give us the mechanic jobs and to let them be supply clerks. You think about how long it took for that to get us into the actual, you know, war and battle. It's actually went pretty quick in, you know, the slow cogs of a very male-dominated, you know, area.
Absolutely, but I just want to run it back to you guys because of you and Shannon and you know, all the women in that initial group, and then the 5 of you who were, I will say, courageous enough, I think, to appear in our documentary. But then, you know, in 2009, you spoke up on Capitol Hill before the House Veterans Committee, the Armed Services Committee, and that kicked in motion, you know, committee reviews in 2011, 2012, the Pentagon policy reviews that started to lift restrictions, and then in 2013, the Joint Chiefs unanimously ended the combat exclusion policy. So, I mean, I think, and certainly there were all other kinds of information and women who were doing other things, but I do know that your testimony and your testimony in person and as it came through the film was part of that push and was a document that people back in Washington could, and so you guys really helped make that change. And I think that's an important part of the history, along with other women who were doing many courageous things, you know, because it was what the mission called for. So I just want to point that out. It didn't happen without people like you and Shannon and the women in our film and the other Lionesses speaking up.
Well, that and the leadership believing in the soldiers' ability to do their job and to go beyond just their job as a mechanic to actually be a soldier. Colonel Brinkley, I mean, believed in all of the soldiers. And I mean, that really, I think, comes to light. And then, of course, Colonel Cambry's like, if you believe in them, I do too. I'll take them. And he never once, he's like, I'll take all of you soldiers. Come on in. And it was never you female soldiers. It was just soldiers. And I think that's a big thing to play too, that it wasn't a female soldier, although, I mean, that's why we were needed. But Colonel Brinkley always said he would put a person on the job. He didn't care who it was or what their gender, nationality, or whatever. If they fit the job, they were doing the job.
Well, I think you mentioned that before. Also, the top the top level command really helped set the tone.
It did in all my years of being in. It does make sense. In all my years of service, if you have a great top leadership, it makes a unit and the morale in a unit high. If you have a bad top leadership, it makes a toxic unit, toxic soldiers. Everything's bad. But that's any job or corporation. And that's one thing people have to realize too, is the military, all branches, I believe. I mean, it's a big organization. It's a big corporation. I mean, our job is just war.
Right.
I think it's important to note that, yes, I'm going to also speak on that too, Rainey. We can go out there and we can do whatever, but if your leadership does not believe in you and does not back you, it will never go anywhere. And that's literally with anything in life. And we had some great leadership that absolutely seen us as soldiers. There wasn't any gender. They were like, we need a soldier to fit the bill for this job. Boom. It wasn't he or she. It was, we needed a soldier. And they never treated us any kind of different kind of way. And they always had our backs. And that's important to be said. Colonel Cabry and Colonel Brinkley looked out for us like we were definitely their own. There was no gender discrimination.
I hear you. And I think, and everyone has always mentioned that. And I, of course, have met both of those, both men. And I got that impression from them that it was like, hey, if I was going to serve, I would serve under you. No problem. Not that you'd accept me, but I could, if I had to, I would. But I know that, Colonel Brinkley was like very supportive. He also had wonderful daughters, one of whom I think entered the service. I want to ask you, because I know that having been in touch, with everyone, and I want to bring it back to this because I think it's very important. The emergence of this, the Special Ops Lioness program as a television show, 8-part. I think it has, as I've heard, and as I think Shannon has heard, and we've discussed, has provoked a lot of emotion. Just as Rainey said, of course, we want to lift stories and lift women's stories, but it's also because they use the title Lioness, and the history is, really 20 years is just a little blip in terms of the history. It's not that we're not that far out, and why do you think it's provoked such a range of reaction among women who serve?
I will tell you the two reactions my family has come in. My aunt called me up and she was like, oh my God, Rainey, did you know Taylor Sheridan has a new movie? And of course, we're Yellowstone fans, gotta love Beth. We watched 1883, 1923. We've watched those, and he is a great storyteller. And my aunt was like, did you know this was coming out? Is this your story? I said, it's Marines. And she was like, what the hell? And I said, she's like, are you going to watch it? And I said, I don't know. I said, one, those kind of movies do trigger me. So I'm not real comfortable with that. And I said, I don't know. My husband, he's like, nope, I'm not watching that. They stole your story. Why would I watch that? And why would they not give you credit? And then my mother-in-law, she watched it and she said it was wonderful. It told so well. She was, she was happy the story got out, that the Lionesses were doing that. So it was, it's a kind of a wide range that people in my family are even telling me. So it's really just kind of it's just kind of an odd place to be. To, you know,
Right.
I don't know how to feel about it, quite honestly. You know, the one thing I hate about it is the fact is they could have called it a different name than Lioness. And I think the story would have been just as great.
Absolutely.
I agree with you on that. And I know that originally they just wanted to call it Lioness, and then they were told they had to call it Special Ops Lioness. Now, the reason behind that, I don't know. Maybe it was because of, you know, the documentary, or maybe it was because of they had some sense that it might get mixed up. But when you watch the television program, when the title comes up, it just says Lioness. And I know that and this is from a slightly different perspective, but when they were teasing the show and showing the promos for it, they showed it up in the middle of Times Square at the large TV, you know, like on the side of this big building, and it was all about Lioness. I had so many people call me and say, "Oh my God, Daria, I didn't know they turned your documentary that you and Meg made into a television series." And I said, "They didn't." And it somehow it was disconcerting. How did you feel, Shannon?
Well, I feel like, okay, if you're going to, and I'm saying this out loud, steal the term Lioness, could you not have fit some backstory in there about how it was originated and coined by the Army? Could you not have told some backstory to at least give some accurate history behind it instead of all this Hollywood nonsense they've spun it into? I just don't understand that. I mean, as an Army veteran, I mean, we all have to respect all of the branches equally. I mean, it's one team, one fight, but we're all a separate entity in the same turn there. So, could it not have been possible for you, you know, I don't even know, the first couple episodes, give a whole backstory about how it was originated and it started in the Army, and then transition into FETs, the female engagement teams, because that is literally how we separate from the different branches. Lioness is Army, FET is Marines, period. And I think that would have been like some cool history they could have thrown in there. And maybe all of us wouldn't feel like, yet again, boom, our story's been stolen or hidden or covered up. I mean, that was half of my driving force. I don't know about you, Rainey, but half of my driving force to continue on after the documentary and go on Capitol Hill. Because there was a lot of people trying to say, you know, when we first started doing it, that it didn't exist and it wasn't happening. That's why the whole Army Times article came out. And once that came out, there was no stopping it. They had to give acknowledgement to it. And they had to say, now, wait a minute. Yes, females are on the front lines. But it would have been really cool if they could have thrown in a little bit of history there, I think.
And another point too, Shannon. I mean, you brought up some valid points. Couldn't they do it like if everybody's old enough to remember the old A team, you know, broken out from jail, blah blah blah? But couldn't they say Lioness, originally created in 2003 by the Army, you know, 1st Battalion, Big Red One? I mean, it could have been that thing that has continued on as this, and just their little blurb on the very first show. At least that.
You bet.
And the other thing is, if this would have been Marines that created this and the Army stole it, you can bet the Marine Corps would have been up in arms.
I agree with you there. They totally would have been. I think what's disturbing to me is like now, just Googling the show, these articles come up that are written in, you know, sort of mainstream magazines and stories and publications. And I've just looked at the titles and I just can't even bring myself to read it, but it's like yeah, like the Special Ops Lioness, you know, the first couple of sentences are, yes, well, that's the CIA, you know, the CIA saw the FET program, and they went in and you know, borrowed the single females and reverted back to calling it Lioness, but you know, it originated with the Marines. And I'm like, oh my goodness. But what I also don't understand is, I find what you guys did and the encounters that you had so fascinating. Why couldn't they have done some stories that included what you did? Because
absolutely, and if that would have been a beautiful way to introduce it, if you would have gave you know, to transition that into a CIA program, if you would have gave a backstory on how it was basically like in the second episode of Special Ops Lioness, how Cruz is in the car and she's like, I don't know what to do, and she's like, you'll figure it out. I mean, just go. That would have been a beautiful backstory to give on the inadequacy and lack of training, in my eyes. You know what? And then you could have turned that into a whole CIA program. How awesome is that? Whatever. I mean, for Hollywood thrill and all that effect.
When you do veteran stories, you need to make sure that and veteran stories that are so recent, you really, you know, everyone has a duty, including Hollywood, including the entertainment industry, to give it a certain degree of respect and consideration before just going off and doing anything. That's my opinion.
Absolutely. We have 22 a day veteran suicides. And honestly, I really think that number probably needs to be relooked at. I'm sure it's more than that. And if you church up something we did, just kind of like how we were overlooked in the beginning when we were out there doing that, and they were busy denying, saying we weren't doing that. I mean, you have to be aware of veterans' mental health. Like, none of this is good for any of us, because I don't know about you, Rainey, but I feel like our story was stolen again. And here we are, yes. And I'm right back in the same mind frame I was in 08 and 09 when we were ready to storm the Capitol Hills. I mean, nothing ever changes without persistency and fight. And by gosh, we went and did all these things, and we did fight so this crap could take place. But just stay true to the story. Don't veer off too much, because this is not only about just telling some Hollywood production story. This is about our mental health. 22
and the lives you affect.
Absolutely.
Well, I think you make a fantastic point, Shannon, and I really appreciate both of you taking the time to talk about this. I do think it is important. I do think it's important that, so for any of the other women and family members of women who served in these kinds of capacities, whether it's Army Lioness, Marine Lioness, FETs, and all those very, who were on, sort of breaking the glass ceiling, so to speak, in terms of what they were being asked to do without the proper training, but rose to the occasion. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk about it. I think it's important for everybody to have the chance to hear this. And Rainey, I also want to just give you a special shout out, because I was thinking, when you went to Iraq, you left your daughter, who was, how old was she at the time?
4 years old. She's 24 this year.
She's 24. Yeah, so that makes sense. 20 years. Okay. And I know you've spoken eloquently, especially when you were up on Capitol Hill, about what that meant and what it was like to return home, because you were gone for like almost a full year, right?
384 days. And okay, that's how much that affects people, when people can still remember 20 years later how long you were gone.
Wow. And so can you just speak to that a little bit about, that's its own kind of trauma. You can't, you can't live with it, but you have to, you can't live it every day when you're over there because you're in service, but when you come home, how long did it take you to kind of find a normalcy with her? Just your daughter? Or how, or not specifically, or just in general, what are your thoughts?
And what kind of reintegration training did you get for that? That's my question, Rainey.
Really, there was no reintegration on females going back into, households. You just were. I think one of the things that helped reintegrate back in, where I think I dealt a little bit back better than Shannon did, is when Shannon got out, she went home. When I got out, I still had the people I was with over there, so I still had a sounding board if things went bad. My husband was in, so I could talk to him. I had places to talk about what I went through, and if I had a bad day, with people who knew what was going on. So, in that way, I did have some resources, but as Army resources, that anything to help me, that wasn't there back then. It has gotten better. It took a while to get back to normal. I still remember the first time the cannon went off at 5 o'clock. You could tell everybody that had been over there, because we all herringborn. Our cars were over into the ditches, and as everybody's like, "What the hell?" and got out, and time to salute the flag. I forgot about this, reveille. Let's get out. So, it was a long. I look back now and I don't think it's that long, but I still have issues, to be honest. And I think all of anybody that's been over into those situations still have issues that affect you on a day-to-day basis. That, Madison does say she likes, retired mom over Army mom a lot better. She says that's way better than it was with the non-stressors anymore. So, but the integration, I bet getting used to being a mom again and being a career soldier and, just a day-to-day thing was, I bet, a good 6 months to a year. Now, probably 6 months. But, we got back and they flat out told us, you have 9 months and you're going back. And that's when I made the choice to get out of active duty and go to the National Guard, because while I want to keep serving, I wasn't staying active duty and keeping going away. We have Army buddies that they have 5-6 deployments,
Wow.
So I wasn't willing to do that to my daughter.
Yeah. And how much does Madison know about the Lioness program now? And I bet.
Well, of course, I have the movie. You can't not have the movie if you star in the documentary. You can't not star in a documentary and not have it. So, and she always laughs that she's the little chunker in the last scene.
She's so cute.
So she's actually really proud. So that's one of the things that her boyfriend, she showed him, and she talks about it a lot. So, she actually knows a lot about the origin story and talking about it. And it was pretty funny. She sat down with her boyfriend. She's like, "Hey, Cody, you got to watch this," and put it in. And he started watching, and he's like, of course, out comes, "Oh, is she going to shoot that little baby deer?" Like all of us said about you, Shannon. And he's like, "Wow, she looks familiar," when it came apart in my scene. And Madison goes, "You really don't know who that is?" And he's like, "No." She's like, "That's my mom." And he's like, "Wow, she's young." I'm like, "Thanks, Cody. Appreciate that." But then he thought it was pretty badass too. He's like, "That's an awesome story." He's like, "Well, it's not, but it's awesome."
Yeah.
But just like you said, like I got out and I went home, but it wasn't long after that I attempted my stunt that I pulled and ended up getting help whether I wanted it or not, really. But like the screening of Lioness when we were on Veterans Breakfast Club on Zoom, Moreno was on that, and she hasn't really spoke about a lot of stuff, and it's been 20 years, and I've seen my battle buddy breaking down. You know, how did you address all of your stuff? Do you go to counseling? Do you get help? Because between me and Navo, we're both checking on her immediately, making sure she's okay and that she's receiving the help she needs, because we're already looked at as inferior for being females to begin with. Well, you really got to keep rising to that persona, and you don't want to come off as weak, but if we don't speak, we die. So did you get the help you needed? I'm just curious.
I actually never did receive counseling. I never have. A lot of it, though, is, it helps to live with a veteran, an Army buddy that you talk to when
Right.
you have the bad things that know what to say. Family members that are military, staying in 28 years. And, I talked to chaplains over the years. I do think telling the story helps. Like I said, I know I have my issues. I can't. It's not that I can't watch war movies. It's one of the things that bother me, because I either pick them all apart with, no, they wouldn't wear that uniform. Where's their patch? Why is their hat like this? I either do that, or else it drives me insane, because especially any kind of battle scene, I'm like, why would you leave them there? Why would you? That's not what I would do.
Yeah.
And then I critique it. I'm like, that's a bad soldier. So I am no fun to watch any kind of war movie with, and it bothers me. And then I do have issues, and like I said, most of it is my husband that talks to me, and I do think a lot of it was, especially in a leadership position, and being a female, it's hard to say, hey, I need to get some help. No, I don't think there's any shame in it, and I actually help my soldiers get help when they needed help. And I actively, hey, there's many branches. Here's a way to get it, male or female. You need to get this help. This is a tool in your toolbox. So I never had a problem as a soldier and a leader telling other soldiers to do that. But I will have to I think it's something ingrained in me that if I would do that, I would be seen as weak. And so luckily, like I said, I kind of have a built-on sounding board, and that's who gets a lot of my frustrations. And poor guy, he's just stuck with me, I guess.
Well, and for sure. And, I'm very outspoken. I guess that'll never change. I got thrown out of, I don't know how many PTSD groups. For some reason, the VA, when this all first transpired, I'm glad to see that they have their own OIF, OEF, and Afghanistan groups now. I'm happy to see that, because that really, really sucked. The Vietnam veterans were like, get your ass out of here. Absolutely.
Well, and my other issue too is you get some of those that are, especially they're trying to get a retirement or they're what, and you're in a PTSD group, and it's like, and I hate to be a judgy McJudger here, but it's like, you were in Kuwait. Why do you have PTSD? But everybody has trauma from certain things, and I shouldn't judge like that. But, I'm thinking to myself, I know people that really need help and that were in far worse situations. You're sad because you were in Kuwait and you didn't get the USO band tour you wanted, and that's why I went to one and I did that, and I went, I can't be here because I'm going to be a judgy McJudgy. And everybody's trauma is different trauma. So I'm not here to judge that. So that's another reason I walked away.
Well, I had a lot of choice words, and then I didn't walk away. They threw me out. So.
Well, I also think that you both experienced sort of the level of the lack of acknowledgement and unpreparedness in terms of the kind of support that was being offered early on, when people didn't really understand. And I can speak about the VA, because I did work with them on this. When they were sort of unprepared and actually had no idea. That was the whole disconnect. They had no idea what so many were being asked to do, and even for men, were operating outside of their MOS on many occasions. So I think it was, you guys were the first, and it was just hard.
Well, especially in an area that's a low density population of, people that are out, Kansas, Arkansas. It's not a large population. That's one thing I've noticed down here in Florida, where I'm at now. The VA services down here for women are a lot larger than they are in Kansas, but there's a large population of retired vets down here. So, I do think that also helps with the level of care, and it can hinder it as well.
Geographically, your care is different depending on where you live. I have talked with people that find it, like over in McAllen. I've talked to people over that way and stuff that, the larger VA facilities, it seems to be easier to get care. The VA has made monumentous efforts to reconstruct that and try to help us out. They started that care in the community program now because there's so many of us. The influx is just too much. There's still stuff that they need to work on in the VA system, in my opinion. But your healthcare as a veteran should not come down to where you live. That's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
And the other thing too is if you're not getting your care, it shouldn't be so hard to just, patient advocate and have to wait. The level of care I get, which is weird, I get great care here. My husband gets horrible care. They're always calling me. Heck, I had a call in while we're on this meeting from the Tampa VA, scheduling some kind of appointment. My husband has to fight tooth and nail to get care. Isn't that a weird switch?
Yeah. See, that's unacceptable. There's still great strides that they can continue to make, and we're just going to keep calling them out on it, huh, Battle?
Yep, that's what I keep telling my husband. Squeaky wheel.
That's right.
Okay, and now we're going to talk about Lioness episode 2, which I want to note was also the first episode was written by Taylor Sheridan, so this is the second episode also written by him. I'm not sure if all the shows were written by him. I think they might have been, but it was also directed by John Hillcoat. So again, I am a fan of a lot of Taylor Sheridan's work. So, and I do think that he does interesting female characters. So let's continue on with this episode and see what we think. I knew from the beginning when, because they end up, they're back in Joe, played by Zoe Saldana, and Caitlin, played by Nicole Kidman, who is kind of Zoe Saldana's handler. They're having lunch in Washington, and that immediately that this episode is going to be more about the home story, because we're in part about the home story because Caitlin, Nicole Kidman's character, keeps asking Zoe Saldana, how's Neil? How's your husband? How are the kids? And Joe's comment there is they're good kids. And then, of course, they cut immediately to her oldest daughter, who's in a fight on the school playground. And so that, well, they're good kids, but they're problems. And then we're at the hospital where we learn, and chime in here if you want, Sean, where Neil, we learn Zoe Saldana's husband, Neil, is some kind of a pediatric oncologist and is there delivering bad news to the parents of a young child because she has a brain tumor. And the thing that struck me is, like, Joe's job is, it's about training crews to deal with pain. And Neil's job is really about trying to relieve pain or have to talk to people about pain that he can't relieve. But it was just, I thought that was an interesting mirroring technique that they put in the script.
That's wonderfully insightful, Daria. I hadn't put those two things together. I think in watching it, I was not anticipating that they would spend so much time with David Nabel. I believe his I'm probably mispronouncing his last name, but his character. Didn't think we'd spend so much time with the husband and what his job is, and diving into Neil. I love his acting. I was really touched by the scene of him talking with the parents, and really floored. As a father of two myself, that scene really wrecked me. And I thought that it was a great way to not only build up more of his character, but help us to understand that this 8-part series may expand into more, because you don't usually in an 8-part miniseries get to spend time with sort of tertiary characters that are sort of on the side. You usually focus so much on the main characters. But I really thought that scene gave us an insight into who he is, what his job is, and then bringing him home and having he and Zoe Saldana have sort of this moment out by the pool and dealing with their daughter and what she did at school. I thought we got some great character arcs there, great character analysis, and just wonderful scenes, quiet scenes in this sort of series that you're expecting a lot of, explosions and violence. You got a really human element there. But what I also thought it sort of struck me was that Zoe comes back in the first episode after having to, drop a missile on her asset, and the trauma that she was dealing with in that time as she gets home. And we talked about that in our first episode of the podcast, but he comes home after dealing with his own trauma, and the way that was dealt with at home was very different than the way that it was dealt with Zoe in the first episode.
Right. With Zoe Saldana's character, Joe, you mean? Yeah. No, absolutely. And I think I do love this mirroring, and I feel like this episode is really just alerting me to the fact that we're going to go deep. And one of the things that I do like in it is that he's taking time and to understand that, there's always the family back home behind whether it's the husband or the wife who's out serving. And that, it affects the entire family. It affects, it has a meaning that resonates through the family life, unlike most other jobs.
Agreed.
Rainey, does that ring true?
I think so. I think that's a very good way to put it. And he's always so excellent at mirroring that life. I mean, I think in 1923, his latest one out, he does that really good with going back and forth what's happening, over in Africa and then, back in the homelands. I think he did that very well with the way you guys are describing that scene.
Right. I know exactly what you mean. And he did, because, and that son was very traumatized by his role in, I think, World War I. But Sean, back to what you were saying about Neil, just before we get to that pool scene, there's this other great line when Neil's driving his daughter home, and he's obviously really, as any parent might be, nobody wants to pick their kid up from school because they were just in a fight. And the father says, "You can't beat hate from the world." And the daughter, Kate, says, "No, but you can try." And then the father, Neil, says, "You're just like your mother." And right in that line, I thought, oh, yeah, okay. That was like a huge clue into the family dynamic. Sean or Shannon, because I know you've seen did you have any reaction to when Joe is in the room with Kate and she goes in to see her and she's trying to talk to her on a one-on-one? Did that scene, like, how successful was she? I mean, it seemed to me that the scene was kind of it really revealed at the distance between Joe as a mother and Kate as her daughter. There's a chasm there. that obviously is set up hopefully to resolve itself. But it's kind of a cold relationship.
I think that's definitely a Rainey question. That's above my pay grade anyways.
Actually, there's a lot of residents in that, because my daughter actually did get in a fight, and I did have to go pick her up from school. And of course, make sure she was okay and everything, and, the reason what's going on in the fight and everything. I was not my daughter's favorite person for a long time, I'll have to say. So a lot of that, what you're saying, resonates a lot with me. My daughter and I didn't see eye to eye, because I totally can see what you're saying with Zoe's character, because, especially when I have a job, I have to do it. I'm short, I'm abrupt. I don't have time for this. I just get it done, get it over with, and just move on. We don't have time for all this. So that resonates a lot with me, actually.
Okay, that's very interesting to hear, because I was when I watched that scene, I immediately was wondering. I wonder how Rainey would react. I wonder how much this would resonate. And so I feel like, because this is only the second episode, hopefully we're going to get to see them kind of sort of, if not work it out completely, at least try to understand each other more. And then, so at this point, Cruz is, who is the asset, is this young woman who's about to go undercover, is being kept in a DC apartment, and they want to put her through the grinder, because they want to see how long, how hard, how quickly, if at all, she'll break. And the reason, once she breaks, they have to know how long it would take, because if they can, it'll take them a second, to get to her if they need to rescue her. And the longer she can hold out and not break, the more chances they have of rescuing her. So it's a little bit, so they basically kidnap her, and even though these are the people on her side, but they act like it's a kidnapping, and they try to break her, and they don't. What did you think of that scene, Shannon?
Well, here comes that sexual exploitation we're about to talk about here, battle. So in that, they have her bound and tied up, and she's in a floor. And I think, because here we are, it's written by Mr. Sheridan, it's in a man's point of view. I just don't see how you can run a show trying to make women appear strong and capable, and then in the same turn you're going to turn around and put a scene in there so she's tied up and she's bound on the floor, and they use a fireman's hose to spray her underwear off of her. I mean,
totally unnecessary.
That was completely unnecessary. I mean, that's the Hollywood glam that everyone has to add into it. I don't understand
the G.I. Jane effect.
Correct. What was the point of exploiting us? That definitely does not show capabilism or strength in any sort. It literally, you just, in my opinion, you undid everything. You just shot in the other episode. You just undone it in episode 2 when you did that. That was completely demoralizing.
Right. It was hard to watch, even for me, because for that very reason. And also the background, if you remember, and I'll let Rainey know this, but is at one point in her life, Cruz, this the female asset who the Zoe Saldana character Joe is training was a stripper. And so it just seems a little too like an easy, like a cheap shot. Because the water
cheap.
torture, the water torture they were putting her through was already horrendous. You didn't need to do that. So I agree with you, Shannon, 100%.
It's just demoralizing. And you know, I mean, I have my own brain, so I think differently, but you know, that also that kind of opens the curtain a little bit to, okay, what are y'all trying to imply, that, you know, we just do this to our own people? So are we all a bunch of, you know, I mean, what are you trying to say there? That could go many ways. If you ask me, that would have been a good way to introduce military sexual trauma if he's trying to do that. Which it does.
Or a soldier to stand up against it.
Exactly. That could have been a beautiful moment for them to have a scene, you know, where she stands up to it. Absolutely, Rainey.
Do you feel that,
right,
though not in the moment, she stands up to that, but for pretty much the rest of the episode, anytime they come in and try to get physical with her, she beats down two of them, and then later on in the bar fight, which we can get to, she, like, I wouldn't say demoralizes him, but she certainly takes some level of revenge. Like, she's almost ready to kill the guy that was running this.
He has him in a chokehold.
Yeah, absolutely.
So is there some retribution that Cruz is able to enact, plus the added idea that now the team that she's been a part of and placed with realized what she was put through and decided, we're going to go take care of these guys. We're going to go knock some sense into them, pretty much, which, you know, bar fight ensues.
Yeah, and that tracks. I mean, right, Rainey? I mean, anybody that messed with us, we would all end up in arms for them and went to bat for any of them.
That is true. That tracks. Well, and there's no one on your team that's going to let that happen to you. I mean, and the fact that, I mean, because they destroyed it. I mean, they could have just destroyed something that they were working on. I mean, that just seems. But then, I mean, them going after it, it goes right on to what would have happened in our unit.
Right.
Well, I'm very interested to hear that, because that's a good question, Sean, because that's what I was interested in, because I had a sense that, you know, that would track people, you know, once you become a team, which is why they called you Team Lioness, and once you become a team, even if, you know, it's just your unit or your people, that there is a bond and it is unbreakable, and you are there for the person who's next to you. And it's interesting to me that Joe, again, the Zoe Saldana character, kept saying that she was actually doing this and for Cruz's own good. And I think that actress, I want to call out that actress, Lysla de Oliveira, because I thought she's really played some of these scenes really well. But he was putting her through this so that she would know how to save her, so that it was for her own good. And it just, you know, it was painful. How did you feel about that, Sean?
I think it was. I feel like we've been watching Cruz go through the grinder since episode 1. We're seeing her develop a family in a way with her team, her unit, with Zoe, the people that she's going to rely on, because we know you're not going to show us this part in episode 2 where they're putting her through the grinder. They need to know how long she's going to last, you know, when her cover's blown. That's setting it up for later in the series, that's where we're going, what's going to happen. It's been tough though, certainly watching her go through all of this. And that's our character development. We need to know as an audience how strong she is. And that's that superhuman element we talked about in episode 1 of our podcast of like, she's going beyond anybody else who's gone through this, of how much what fight is in her and what she's willing to endure for her mission.
Yeah, male, female, anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important to say while they're exploiting weaknesses, they're also in some weird way highlighting strengths as well. And that's really the military in a nutshell. They literally break you down to build you up.
So in a way, Shannon, what you're kind of saying is that in a larger sense, that resonates.
It does I never went through any kind of training like that, that's for sure. But it definitely does resonate. I mean, when you enter the military, they basically tell you, you're nothing, you're clay, and we're going to mold you. And they literally put you through the ringer. And at the same time, you're like, I'm weak, I can't do all this. And by the end of it, you realize, oh my gosh, I'm not weak. I'm actually really strong. And look at all these accomplishments and achievements I did because they pushed me to my breaking point and I didn't break. I kept going. I mean, that's for any soldier, sailor, Marine, airman, Coast Guard. That's for all of us. But it stings because we are females and we've already been through so much, and it just stings to have to see that on screen.
Also, I think you mentioned in the last episode, Shannon, and maybe Rainey, you have some thoughts on this too. It's just this idea that you don't just have to prove yourself once. You have to be twice as good or twice as fast or, twice as competent or twice as excellent.
And you have to do it every day.
Absolutely. No give.
That is a lot of pressure.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if male decides you can't do that same job. They're going to always point out that you can't do it.
Absolutely. If you show any kind of weakness, they're going to jump on that and they're going to be like, see, you can't do it. You weren't cut out for it because you cried or you complained or you had a moment and you broke down. So in a way, we're actually held to a higher standard, in my opinion.
Definitely. And I think these first 2 episodes, to some extent, that's how it's written. Like it's written like his choice to create the female character of Cruz as almost like a superwoman and just a super asset, really makes that point in a way. And then just because I think we're near the close here, the close of the episode, after they kind of take revenge for Cruz's treatment, she gets a phone call from the woman Ayalia, who's played by Stephanie Budenbach, and she is coming to Chesapeake, and she is bringing some young guys, and they want to have a good time. And I just thought it was kind of hysterical that they're now Cruz is talking in in her, she's undercover, and she's like, yeah, I'll meet you, yeah. And then she said that she's told her Mark tells her, yeah, where's something sexy, bring a swimsuit, I'm bringing boys. And then she hangs up, and so Cruz's last line is like, I need to go shopping.
Yeah.
I just thought that was, after everything in that entire episode, that was like, well, yeah, you want to go undercover, you have to go shopping.
Well, no time to chill. There's no break, no downtime.
Well, I will say, as much as your interest in Daria, your interest in having a prequel series to really like lay what the Lionesses were and the origin of that, I almost am just as interested if they did something post Special Ops Lioness, where Cruz transitions out of the military and give us that story.
Well,
Oh, that'd be
Sean,
interesting.
Yeah, that would be interesting. And I think, they don't know it, but we're just like giving them, we're building out their whole 1883, 1923 Yellowstone and Yellowstone 2.0. We're doing that for the Lioness show, just in this conversation.
Well, I'll wait for the royalty check then.
Right. Thank us at the time.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you, Rainey, so much for joining us.
Oh, no problem.
Well, it was no problem. It was fantastic. You contributed so much, and I really appreciate it. And I know, Sean's right here, but on behalf of the Veterans Breakfast Club, wow, and thank you so much.
Not a problem.
And I'd just like to, again, pump the operationlioness.org website to our listeners. Please check out operationlioness.org. This is Shannon's soon-to-be nonprofit organization. Come check out www.veteransbreakfastclub.org to check out everything that we have going on, the events that we have all centered around veteran stories. And we'll also have a link in here in the description for Daria's Lioness documentary, which if you haven't seen, Daria, where can they stream it?
Oh, you can stream it everywhere. You can stream it on Apple, Amazon Prime. It's easily available, and you just put in Lioness the documentary and it'll come up.
Excellent. And we'll be back with episode 3 of Special Ops Lioness, our review, with more history, more context, and more Lionesses, right, Daria?
Absolutely. With more special guests, Shannon and I will return along with you, Sean, but we will have more special guests. But again, thank you, Rainey, for joining us.
Thank you for the insight.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Battle. Appreciate it.
No problem.